Sometimes the most shocking moments happen when we least expect them. Picture this. Thousands of tourists gathering outside Buckingham Palace on a crisp morning, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Children pointing excitedly at the magnificent horses, families posing for photos, and everyone expecting the usual perfect display of British tradition. But what happened next would be replayed millions of times across the world, turning an ordinary ceremonial day into an extraordinary viral sensation that nobody saw coming. A single moment that lasted just seconds would spark debates, create heroes, and remind us all that even the most trained professionals are still human. This is the true story of what really happened when the cameras were rolling, the crowds were watching, and everything went completely wrong in the most spectacular way possible. The morning of September 15th started like any other ceremonial day at Buckingham Palace. The sun cast long golden rays across the forecourt as tourists began gathering behind the black iron gates, their cameras and phones already out, ready to capture the famous spectacle that had been performed with military precision for generations. Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his bearskin hat one final time as he stood in the stable yard. Running his hand along the neck of his mount, Thunder, a magnificent black gelding who had served in the household cavalry for 8 years. At 32 years old, James had been part of the Queen's lifeguard for over a decade, participating in hundreds of ceremonial duties without a single incident. His record was spotless, his dedication unwavering, and his skill in the saddle was considered among the best in the regiment. Thunder snorted softly, his breath visible in the cool morning air. The horse was a veteran of countless ceremonies, from state visits to royal weddings, always maintaining the composure and dignity expected of a royal mount. James patted the horse's neck affectionately, feeling the familiar comfort of their partnership. They had performed together so many times that they moved almost as one being, anticipating each other's movements with an intuitive understanding that only comes from years of training and trust. The sound of hooves on cobblestones echoed through the yard as other guards prepared their mounts. The atmosphere was professional but relaxed, with the easy camaraderie of soldiers who had performed this duty countless times before. Corporal Davies was checking his stirrups on his gray mare, while Lieutenant Foster was reviewing the route one more time with the younger guards who were still learning the intricate choreography of the ceremony. Sarah Williams stood among the crowd outside the palace gates, her phone ready to record what she hoped would be perfect footage to share with her family back home in Australia. She had been planning this London trip for months, and witnessing the changing of the guard was at the top of her must-see list. Beside her, her teenage daughter Emma rolled her eyes at her mother's enthusiasm, but secretly she was excited too. There was something magical about being part of such an ancient tradition, even as a spectator. The crowd was larger than usual that morning, with tour groups from around the world mixing with local families and individual travelers. Children sat on their parents' shoulders for a better view, while elderly visitors found spots on nearby benches. Street vendors sold Union Jack flags and royal souvenirs, their voices adding to the cheerful buzz of anticipation that always preceded the ceremony. Inside the palace, the final preparations were underway. The guards who would be relieved were already in position, standing motionless at their posts with the discipline that had made the British Royal Guard famous worldwide. Their red tunics were perfectly pressed, their boots polished to a mirror shine, and their faces showed no emotion despite the growing excitement of the crowd beyond the gates. James led Thunder out of the stable, the horse's hooves clicking rhythmically on the stone pathway. The morning routine was second nature to both of them. The careful checking of equipment, the gentle warm-up exercises, the final inspection by the duty officer. Every detail had to be perfect, as it always was, as it always had been. The other mounted guards fell into formation behind James, their horses moving with the practiced ease of animals who knew their role in the grand theater of royal ceremony. The morning light caught the gleam of their breastplates and the shine of their helmets, creating a picture-perfect scene that photographers and videographers around the world would pay handsomely to capture. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison walked among the mounted guards, conducting his final inspection with the eye of a man who had overseen thousands of such ceremonies. Every brass button had to gleam, every piece of equipment had to be in its proper place, and every horse had to be groomed to perfection. The reputation of the regiment depended on these details, and he took his responsibility seriously. As the clock approached the ceremonial time, James could feel Thunder's slight tension beneath him. The horse was eager to begin, his ears pricked forward toward the sound of the gathering crowd. It was a good sign. Thunder was alert and ready, just as he should be. James had no reason to suspect that this morning would be any different from the hundreds that had come before. The gate guards received their signal and began the process of opening the palace gates to allow the ceremonial procession to begin. The crowd pressed forward slightly, cameras raised, as the moment they had all been waiting for approached. Sarah Williams adjusted her phone's position, making sure she had the perfect angle to capture the entire ceremony from start to finish. In the stable yard, the order came to move out. James touched his heels gently to Thunder's sides, and the horse responded immediately, moving forward with the pride and bearing that befitted a royal mount. Behind him, the other guards fell into perfect formation, their horses stepping in time as they had been trained to do. The sound of their approach reached the crowd first, the rhythmic beating of hooves on stone, growing louder and more distinct with each passing moment. Children in the crowd began to point excitedly, while adults raised their cameras higher, trying to catch the first glimpse of the magnificent spectacle that was about to unfold. James felt the familiar surge of pride that always came at this moment. To be part of something so historic, so meaningful, was a privilege he never took for granted. The weight of tradition sat comfortably on his shoulders as Thunder carried him forward toward the gates, where hundreds of people waited to witness the ceremony that connected modern Britain to its royal heritage. The morning was perfect, clear skies, mild temperature, and excellent visibility. The conditions could not have been better for the ceremony, and everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. James had no way of knowing that in just a few minutes, everything would change, and this perfect morning would become the most talked-about ceremony in the regiment's recent history. As they approached the gates, Thunder's step was sure and confident, his head held high with the dignity that had been bred into him through generations of royal service. James sat tall in the saddle, his bearing impeccable, ready to represent the crown with the honor and distinction that had defined his entire career. The gates swung open, and the ceremony began. Thunder stepped through the palace gates with a measured cadence that had become second nature through years of ceremonial duties. The crowd's anticipation was palpable, creating an electric atmosphere that seemed to energize both horse and rider. James felt the familiar sense of connection with the hundreds of spectators whose eyes were now fixed on the magnificent procession emerging from the royal residence. Sarah Williams held her breath as she began recording, her phone capturing every detail of the approaching guards. The morning light was perfect, casting the entire scene in a golden glow that made everything look like a scene from a historical film. Emma, despite her earlier pretense of disinterest, found herself genuinely captivated by the grandeur unfolding before them. The formation moved with clockwork precision across the forecourt. Each horse knew its position, each rider maintained perfect posture, and the entire spectacle flowed with the seamless choreography that had taken decades to perfect. Tourists snapped photos frantically, trying to capture memories of a tradition that stretched back centuries, while seasoned royal watchers nodded approvingly at the flawless execution of the ceremony. Thunder's ears suddenly twitched forward, picking up a sound that James couldn't yet identify. The horse's step faltered slightly, just for a moment, but it was enough to catch the experienced rider's attention. In all their years together, Thunder had never shown uncertainty during a ceremony. James felt a subtle shift in the horse's muscles beneath him, a tension that hadn't been there moments before. From somewhere in the crowd came an unexpected sound. A child's electronic toy had malfunctioned, emitting a series of sharp, high-pitched beeps that cut through the morning air like alarm signals. The sound was completely foreign to the ceremonial environment, unlike anything Thunder had encountered during his years of service. The toy's owner, a 6-year-old boy named Tommy, frantically tried to turn it off while his mortified parents attempted to muffle the noise. Thunder's head shot up, his eyes wide as he tried to locate the source of the unfamiliar sound. The horse's training told him to maintain formation and continue forward, but his instincts as a prey animal were screaming danger. The electronic beeping seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the palace walls and creating an echo effect that confused and alarmed the normally unflappable animal. James felt Thunder's anxiety building beneath him and immediately began using every calming technique he knew. His voice was barely above a whisper as he spoke soothingly to his mount, his hands steady on the reins, trying to project the confidence and control that had seen them through countless ceremonies before. For a moment, it seemed to be working. Thunder's ears flicked back toward his rider's voice, and his step began to steady. But then the toy malfunctioned again, this time emitting an even louder series of beeps that seemed to pierce the air like electronic sirens. The sound was so unexpected, so completely out of place in the dignified setting of the royal ceremony, that several people in the crowd jumped in surprise. For Thunder, it was the final straw. The horse's reaction was instantaneous and dramatic. With a snort of alarm, Thunder reared up on his hind legs, his front hooves pawing at the air as he tried to escape from what he perceived as an unknown threat. James, caught completely off guard by the sudden movement, felt his carefully maintained balance shift dangerously. His legs tightened around Thunder's sides as he leaned forward, trying to stay with the horse's movement and regain control. The crowd gasped collectively as they watched the perfectly choreographed ceremony suddenly dissolve into chaos. Cameras that had been recording the stately procession were now capturing something entirely different. A royal guard fighting to stay in the saddle as his mount danced in panic beneath him. Thunder came down hard on his front legs and immediately reared again, this time even higher and more violently. The horse's eyes were rolling, showing white as he spun in a circle, trying to locate and escape from the electronic threat that his brain couldn't process or understand. James felt his seat slip again, his hands clutching desperately at the reins as he struggled to stay mounted. The other guards in the formation reacted with professional calm, their own mounts remaining steady despite Thunder's distress. Lieutenant Foster immediately began maneuvering his horse toward James and Thunder, ready to provide assistance, while Corporal Davies quietly spoke to his own mount to keep her calm in the face of Thunder's panic. Sarah Williams found herself torn between continuing to record and wanting to help somehow. Her maternal instincts kicked in as she watched the guard struggling to control his frightened horse. She could see the determination in James's face, the professional competence that was keeping him in the saddle despite the impossible circumstances. Tommy's parents finally managed to turn off the malfunctioning toy, but the damage was already done. Thunder's panic had reached a crescendo, and the absence of the sound didn't immediately register with the terrified animal. The horse continued his desperate attempts to escape, each movement becoming more violent and unpredictable than the last. James knew he was fighting a losing battle. Thunder's panic was beyond anything they had trained for, and the horse's movements were becoming increasingly erratic. Despite his years of experience and his deep bond with Thunder, James could feel his position in the saddle becoming more precarious with each violent movement. His military training told him to stay calm, to project confidence, to never give up, but his practical experience told him that this situation was rapidly moving beyond his control. The crowd watched in horrified fascination as the drama unfolded before them. What had begun as a picture-perfect ceremony had transformed into something that belonged more in a rodeo than at Buckingham Palace. Children pointed in amazement, while their parents tried to shield them from what they feared might become a serious accident. Emma grabbed her mother's arm, her teenage bravado completely forgotten in the face of real danger. "Mom, is it going to be okay?" she whispered, her voice tight with concern. Sarah continued recording, but her hands were shaking now, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama that was about to become viral sensation around the world. Thunder made one final, desperate attempt to escape from the perceived threat. The horse gathered all his strength and launched himself skyward in a buck that would have been impressive in any rodeo arena. His back arched like a drawn bow as his hind legs kicked high into the air, and this time James knew there was no way he could stay with the movement. Time seemed to slow down as James felt himself leaving the saddle. The world tilted crazily around him as Thunder's buck sent him flying through the air, his arms windmilling as he tried to find some way to break his fall. Behind him, he could hear the collective gasp of hundreds of spectators, and in that suspended moment, he had time to think about how this single incident would change everything he had worked for throughout his entire career. The impact, when it came, would be heard around the world. James hit the ground with a sickening thud that seemed to echo across the silent forecourt. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs and sent his bearskin hat rolling across the cobblestones, coming to rest near the feet of horrified tourists who stood frozen in shock. For a moment that felt like an eternity, the only sound was Thunder's heavy breathing as the horse finally came to a stop, his panic subsiding now that his rider was no longer on his back. Sarah Williams' phone continued recording, capturing every detail of the aftermath in stark, unforgiving clarity. The footage showed James lying motionless on the ground, his red tunic a vivid splash of color against the gray stones, while Thunder stood nearby, sides heaving, his eyes still wide with residual fear. It was an image that would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms around the world within hours. The professional training of the Royal Guards kicked in immediately. Lieutenant Foster dismounted in one fluid motion and was at James's side within seconds, his medical training taking precedence over ceremonial protocol. He knelt beside the fallen guard, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he checked for signs of serious injury, while speaking in calm, reassuring tones. "James, can you hear me? Don't try to move yet," Foster said quietly, his voice carrying just enough authority to cut through any confusion the fallen guard might be experiencing. Behind him, Corporal Davies was already on his radio, calling for medical assistance and coordinating with palace security to manage the growing crowd of concerned spectators. James's eyes fluttered open, and he tried to sit up immediately, his ingrained sense of duty overriding any physical discomfort. "The ceremony," he gasped, his voice hoarse from the impact. "I need to get back up." Thunder. His concern for his mount was evident even through his obvious pain and embarrassment. "Thunder's fine," Foster assured him, gently but firmly keeping James on the ground. "Stay down until the medics check you over." "That's an order." The lieutenant's tone brooked no argument, even as he could see the mortification in James's eyes at having fallen in front of hundreds of spectators and countless cameras. The crowd's initial shock was giving way to a buzz of concerned conversation. Parents were explaining to their children what had happened, while tourists continued taking photos and videos, though many seemed uncomfortable about filming someone's moment of vulnerability. Sarah Williams finally stopped recording, her maternal instincts overriding her desire to capture the historic moment. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the palace physician, arrived within minutes, having been alerted by Davies's radio call. She was a middle-aged woman with silver hair and kind eyes who had been treating royal household staff and guards for over 15 years. She approached with her medical bag in hand, her professional demeanor immediately commanding respect from both guards and spectators alike. "Let me through, please," she said firmly, but politely to the crowd that had pressed closer to see what was happening. The tourists stepped back respectfully, creating a space around the injured guard while still maintaining their positions to witness whatever would happen next. Dr. Harper knelt beside James and began her examination with the thoroughness that had made her one of the most trusted medical professionals in the royal household. She checked his pupils for signs of concussion, tested his reflexes, and carefully palpated his limbs and torso for broken bones or other serious injuries. "Can you tell me your name and today's date?" she asked, watching his eyes carefully as she spoke. "Sergeant James Mitchell, and it's September 15th, James replied, his voice stronger now, though still tinged with embarrassment. "Doctor, I'm fine. Really, I need to complete the ceremony." His dedication to duty was touching, even in his current circumstances. "Sergeant, you've just taken a considerable fall from a horse on his stone pavement," Dr. Harper replied with the patience of someone who had dealt with stubborn soldiers before. "You'll complete ceremonies again, but first we need to make sure you haven't sustained any serious injuries." Meanwhile, Corporal Davies had approached Thunder, who was standing nervously near where he had thrown his rider. The horse's ears were still forward, his body tense, but the immediate panic had passed. Davies spoke softly to the animal, his voice carrying the same calm authority that worked with both horses and men. "Easy there, Thunder," Davies murmured, slowly reaching for the horse's reins. "It's over now. You're safe." Thunder allowed himself to be caught, though his muscles remained tense under his skin. The corporal began leading the horse away from the scene, knowing that the animal needed time to calm down completely before anyone attempted to ride him again. The crowd watched this secondary drama unfold with fascination. Many of them had never seen such a close interaction between military personnel and their mounts, and there was something deeply moving about watching Davies' gentle handling of the distressed horse. Several people in the crowd began to understand that this wasn't just about a guard falling off his horse. It was about the deep bonds between the soldiers and the animals they worked with every day. Emma Williams tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, what's going to happen to the horse? Will he be in trouble?" The teenager's concern was genuine, reflecting the empathy that many in the crowd were feeling as they watched the aftermath of the accident. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding them and saw the same concern reflected everywhere. "I don't know, love," she admitted. "I hope not. It wasn't really his fault, was it?" That noise scared him badly. Dr. Harper completed her initial examination and sat back on her heels, relief evident on her face. "No obvious signs of serious injury," she announced to Lieutenant Foster, though she kept her voice low enough that the crowd couldn't hear the details. "Possible mild concussion, definitely bruised ribs, and he's going to be very sore tomorrow, but I don't think anything's broken." James tried to sit up again, and this time Dr. Harper allowed it, though she kept a steadying hand on his shoulder. The moment he was upright, a spontaneous round of applause broke out from the crowd. It started with just a few people and quickly spread throughout the entire gathering, becoming a genuine expression of relief and support for the fallen guard. James looked around in amazement as hundreds of tourists clapped for him, their faces showing not mockery or disappointment, but genuine concern and encouragement. Children waved at him from their parents' shoulders, while elderly visitors nodded their approval. It was not the reaction he had expected, and for a moment he felt overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness of strangers. "Sir," called out an elderly gentleman with an American accent, "that was quite a ride. Are you okay?" His concern was echoed by voices throughout the crowd, people calling out well wishes in dozens of different languages as word of his condition spread through the gathering. Lieutenant Foster helped James to his feet, supporting him until it was clear the sergeant could stand on his own. "The ceremony will continue," Foster announced to the crowd, his voice carrying across the forecourt. "Thank you all for your patience and concern." It was a diplomatic way of acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances while maintaining the dignity of the royal household. As James was helped toward a waiting vehicle that would take him to the medical facility for a more thorough examination, he turned back to look at the crowd one more time. These people, who had come from around the world to witness a perfect display of British pageantry, had instead seen him at his most vulnerable moment. Yet their response had been nothing but kindness and support. Thunder was led away to the stables, where he would be examined by the veterinary staff and given time to recover from his own trauma. The horse's career was far from over, but it would be some time before he would participate in another ceremony. The bond between horse and rider would need to be rebuilt, trust would need to be restored, and both Thunder and James would need time to heal from their shared ordeal. The ceremony did continue, with replacement guards taking their positions and the traditional changing of the guard proceeding as it had for generations. But everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just an accident, but a moment that had revealed the humanity behind the pageantry, the vulnerability beneath the perfect uniforms, and the kindness that connects strangers when faced with someone else's difficult moment. As the footage of James's fall began to spread across social media platforms around the world, it would spark conversations about tradition and humanity, about the pressures placed on those who serve in ceremonial roles, and about the unexpected connections that can form between people in moments of crisis. But for now, James was simply a soldier who had fallen and gotten back up, supported by the kindness of strangers and the professionalism of his fellow guards. The story was far from over. Within 2 hours of Sarah Williams uploading her video to social media with the caption, "Royal Guard falls off horse at Buckingham Palace. Hope he's okay," the footage had been shared over 10,000 times. By evening, that number had exploded to over 2 million shares across multiple platforms, with news outlets around the world picking up the story and broadcast networks featuring it as their lead human interest piece. James Mitchell sat in his small London flat, his laptop open in front of him, watching in amazement as his most embarrassing professional moment played out on screens across the globe. His ribs ached with every breath, and the mild concussion Dr. Harper had diagnosed made his head throb, but nothing hurt quite like watching himself fall off thunder in high-definition video that millions of people were now viewing, commenting on, and sharing. The comments section under Sarah's original video had become a fascinating study in human nature. While James had expected mockery and jokes at his expense, what he found instead was an overwhelming outpouring of support from people around the world. Messages of concern for his well-being poured in from viewers in dozens of languages, with many people sharing their own stories of falls, accidents, and moments when things had gone wrong in their professional lives. "That poor horse looked so scared," wrote Maria from Spain. "The guard handled it as well as anyone could have. Hope both are okay. Been riding for 30 years, and I would have fallen off too," commented John from Australia. "That electronic noise was terrifying for the horse. Guard showed real skill staying on as long as he did. My son is obsessed with the Royal Guards," wrote Jennifer from Canada. "We've watched this video a dozen times, and he keeps saying the guard was very brave for getting back up. Kids see things differently than adults sometimes." Emma Williams had become something of an internet detective, following the story spread across various platforms and reporting back to her mother about the public reaction. "Mum, look at this," she said, showing Sarah a compilation video someone had created using footage from multiple angles. People who were there posted their own videos, and you can see how scared Thunder was from different viewpoints. Nobody's blaming the guard at all. The video compilation was indeed revealing. Footage from other tourists showed the moments leading up to Thunder's panic more clearly, capturing the electronic toy's malfunction and the horse's growing distress. Viewers could see James's skillful attempts to calm his mount, his professional demeanor even in the face of an impossible situation, and the genuine fear in Thunder's eyes that had triggered his flight response. Professional horse trainers and riding instructors began weighing in on social media, explaining to the public exactly how difficult James's situation had been and praising his handling of a genuinely dangerous circumstance. "No shame in that fall," tweeted Rebecca Martinez, a former Olympic equestrian. "Electronics sounds like that can spook any horse, no matter how well trained. The guard did everything right." Dr. Elizabeth Harper made an unprecedented public statement through the palace's official channels, addressing concerns about both James and Thunder. "Sergeant Mitchell has been thoroughly examined and has sustained no serious injuries," she announced in a brief video posted to the royal household's social media accounts. "He is expected to make a full recovery and return to duty when medically cleared. Thunder is also in good health and spirits. Both guard and horse are being given the time they need to recover from this incident." The palace's decision to address the incident directly was unusual, but proved to be exactly the right approach. Rather than pretending the fall hadn't happened or dismissing it as unimportant, the official acknowledgement validated the public's concern and demonstrated that the royal household cared about both its human and animal members. James's phone had been ringing constantly since the video went viral, with reporters from around the world seeking interviews and comments. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, had advised him to avoid speaking to the media until the initial attention died down, but the calls kept coming from increasingly creative sources. Sergeant Mitchell came a voice when James finally answered his phone, thinking it was his sister calling from Scotland. "This is Barbara Chun from Good Morning America. We'd love to have you on the show to talk about your experience and the public's amazing response to your story. I'm sorry, but I'm not giving interviews at this time," James replied politely, sticking to the script his superiors had provided. But privately, he was amazed that American television was interested in his story. What surprised James most was the international reach of the incident. Videos of his fall were being discussed on talk shows in Japan, featured in news segments in Germany, and had even become the subject of editorial cartoons in French newspapers. The universal nature of the response, people from every culture and background expressing concern and support, was something he had never experienced before. Thunder's recovery was progressing well in the palace stables. The horse had been examined thoroughly by the veterinary staff, who found no physical injuries from his panic episode. However, the animal was clearly still processing the traumatic experience, showing signs of hypervigilance whenever he heard unexpected sounds. The stable staff had begun a careful desensitization program to help Thunder regain his confidence around electronic noises. Corporal Davies had taken special responsibility for Thunder's rehabilitation, spending extra time with the horse each day and gradually introducing him to recorded sounds similar to what had triggered his panic. "He's a good horse with years of service left in him," Davies explained to James when he visited the stables. "We just need to rebuild his confidence slowly and carefully." The public's fascination with the story had evolved beyond simple entertainment. Educational posts about horse behavior began circulating alongside the original video, with animal behaviorists explaining why Thunder had reacted the way he did and horse welfare organizations using the incident to discuss the psychological needs of working animals. A particularly moving response came from Tommy's parents, the family whose malfunctioning toy had inadvertently caused the entire incident. They had tracked down Sarah Williams through social media and asked her to pass along a message to James if she ever had the opportunity to contact him. "Please tell him how sorry we are," Tommy's mother had written. "Our son has been crying because he thinks he hurt the soldier and the horse. We never intended for anything like this to happen. Tommy wants to send the guard a get-well card if that would be appropriate." When James learned about the family's message through the network of people following his story, his first instinct was to reach out to them directly. With his commanding officer's permission, he recorded a brief video message that Sarah Williams agreed to share on her social media accounts. To Tommy and his family, James said, sitting in his flat with his uniform cap visible in the background, "Please don't feel bad about what happened. Accidents occur, and nobody was seriously hurt. Thunder and are both doing well, and we want you to know there are no hard feelings. Tommy, please keep enjoying your toys, and don't worry about us. We're both going to be fine." The video of James's message to Tommy became almost as popular as the original fall footage, with viewers praising the guard's grace and kindness in reaching out to comfort a child who was feeling guilty about the accident. Comments flooded in from parents thanking James for showing their own children how to handle mistakes and forgiveness. Educational institutions began using the incident as a case study in crisis management, public relations, and the power of social media to shape public narratives. Business schools analyzed how the royal household's transparent handling of the situation had turned a potential embarrassment into a public relations success, while communications professors used the story to demonstrate how authentic human responses could create positive connections with audiences. The ripple effects of those few seconds of video continued to spread far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. James Mitchell had become an accidental internet celebrity. Thunder had become the world's most famous ceremonial horse. And Sarah Williams found herself at the center of a global conversation about empathy, professionalism, and the unpredictable nature of viral content. But the story was still unfolding, and the most surprising developments were yet to come. 3 weeks after the incident, James Mitchell stood once again in the stable yard at Buckingham Palace, but this time the atmosphere was different. The worldwide attention had fundamentally changed how the royal household approached their ceremonial duties, leading to new safety protocols, enhanced training programs, and a greater awareness of the human elements behind the pageantry that millions of people watched every year. Thunder approached James cautiously in the stable, their reunion carefully orchestrated by the veterinary and training staff who had been working with both of them during their recovery period. The horse's eyes were calmer now, his movements more confident, but there was still a wariness that hadn't been there before their shared ordeal. James extended his hand slowly, allowing Thunder to catch his scent and remember their partnership. "Easy, boy," James murmured, using the same gentle tone that had characterized their relationship for years. "We're going to take this slowly, just like we always have." Thunder's nostrils flared as he processed James's familiar scent, and gradually the horse relaxed, allowing his former rider to stroke his neck. The rehabilitation process had been as much about rebuilding trust as it had been about addressing the physical aftermath of the fall. Dr. Sarah Chun, an animal behaviorist brought in specifically to work with Thunder, had developed a comprehensive program that gradually reintroduced the horse to the sights, sounds, and situations he would encounter during ceremonial duties. "The key is patience," Dr. Chun explained to James as they worked together in the training arena. "Thunder needs to learn that unexpected sounds don't always mean danger. We've been working with recorded electronic noises, gradually increasing the volume and complexity, and his responses have been excellent." The public's continued interest in Thunder's recovery had surprised everyone involved. Updates about the horse's progress were regularly shared on the royal household's social media accounts, with each post receiving thousands of supportive comments from people around the world who had become invested in his story. Children sent drawings of Thunder to the palace, while riding schools used his rehabilitation as a teaching tool about patience and understanding in horse training. James's own recovery had progressed smoothly, though the psychological impact of falling in front of millions of viewers had proven more challenging than the physical injuries. The support from strangers around the world had been overwhelming and touching, but it had also created pressure to live up to the heroic image that some people had constructed around him. "I'm not a hero," James confided to his sister Margaret during one of their weekly phone calls. "I just fell off a horse. People are acting like I saved someone's life or something." "Maybe that's not the point," Margaret replied gently. "Maybe people needed to see that even the guards at Buckingham Palace are human beings who can have bad days and get back up again. Maybe that's exactly what some people needed to hear right now." Her words proved to be more prophetic than either of them realized. Letters and emails have been pouring into the palace from people around the world sharing their own stories of failure, recovery, and resilience. A businessman in Tokyo wrote about how watching James get back up after his fall had inspired him to restart his failed company. A student in Brazil shared how the video had helped her cope with anxiety about public speaking after her own embarrassing moment in front of her class. The educational impact of the incident had grown far beyond anyone's expectations. Riding schools reported increased interest in programs about horse behavior and safety, while military recruitment offices noted a spike in inquiries from young people inspired by the professionalism and grace James had shown under pressure. Sarah Williams had become an unexpected advocate for both James and Thunder, using her social media platforms to share updates about their recovery and to promote horse welfare organizations. Her original video had been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms, making it one of the most watched royal-related videos in internet history. "I never imagined when I started recording that morning that it would turn into this," Sarah told a local news crew that interviewed her about the phenomenon. "But I'm glad it has. People have learned so much about the guards, about the horses, and about how we can support each other, even when we're strangers. Emma Williams had started a fundraising campaign for horse welfare charities, inspired by the attention Thunder's story had received. Her efforts had raised over £50,000 for organizations that cared for retired military and police horses, turning her mother's accidental viral video into a force for positive change. The palace had initially been cautious about the attention, but the overwhelmingly positive response had led to some progressive changes in how they approach public engagement. For the first time, they began offering behind-the-scenes glimpses of the guards' training and the care provided to their horses, helping the public understand the skill and dedication required for ceremonial duties. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison had been watching these developments with interest and had come to a surprising conclusion about the entire incident. In 40 years of military service, I've never seen anything bring more positive attention to what we do than Sergeant Mitchell's fall, he told his staff during their weekly briefing. People understand now that we're not just ceremonial figures in fancy uniforms. They see the training, the skill, and the genuine care we have for our horses. The day finally came when James and Thunder were cleared to participate in a ceremony together again. The decision had been carefully considered by medical staff, veterinarians, behaviorists, and commanding officers, with everyone agreeing that both horse and rider were ready to return to active duty. The announcement of their return was made through the royal household's official channels, and the response was immediate and enthusiastic. Tourists began planning trips to London specifically to see James and Thunder perform together again, while news crews from around the world requested permission to film their comeback ceremony. On the morning of their return, James felt a familiar mixture of nerves and excitement as he prepared for the ceremony. The global attention meant that millions of people would be watching to see how he and Thunder performed together, but he had learned to focus on what really mattered, doing his duty with honor and taking care of his partner. Thunder seemed to sense the significance of the day as well. The horse's bearing was proud and confident, his ears forward with anticipation rather than anxiety. The rehabilitation work had been successful, and both horse and rider were ready to reclaim their place in the ceremonial traditions of the royal household. As they prepared to enter the forecourt, where hundreds of tourists waited with cameras ready, James reflected on everything that had changed since that September morning when a simple electronic malfunction had turned his world upside down. The fall had been embarrassing and painful, but it had also revealed something beautiful about human nature, the capacity for strangers to care about each other, to offer support without expecting anything in return, and to find inspiration in moments of vulnerability and recovery. The gates opened, and James guided Thunder forward into the courtyard where their story had begun. This time, there were no unexpected sounds, no moments of panic, just the steady rhythm of hooves on stone and the quiet pride of a partnership that had been tested and emerged stronger. The crowd's applause was immediate and sustained, not just for the ceremony, but for the return of two figures who had unknowingly touched millions of lives around the world. Children pointed excitedly, parents took photos, and tourists from every corner of the globe watched with genuine affection as James and Thunder performed their duties with the same precision and dignity that had characterized their service for years. As the ceremony concluded without incident, James felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with viral videos or international attention. He had done his job well, Thunder had performed magnificently, and together they had proven that setbacks don't have to be endings. Sometimes they're just the beginning of a better story. The video of their successful return ceremony would be shared millions of times, but this time the comments would focus on triumph rather than sympathy, on professional excellence rather than human vulnerability. James Mitchell and Thunder had completed their journey from fall to redemption, and in doing so, they had reminded the world that courage isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up and trying again. Their story had become larger than either of them could have imagined. But at its heart, it remained beautifully simple. A man and his horse, serving with honor, supported by the unexpected kindness of strangers from around the world.